Welcome to Circular Firing Squad. I'm Marty, a counseling faculty at Kent State University and host for Circular Firing Squad. We've got only 3 members tonight with 6 questions and 3 answers to each question. So we're going to do sort of a compact go round twice show. And the squad members generate the questions and we all have to answer, and it's ranging from just the absurd to the sublime. Let's see who's with us in this episode.
Hi, everybody. Elliott Ingersoll, professor of counseling at Cleveland State University and host of Applied Topically.
What's up, all? Mitch Conrad, counselor trainee at Innovative Counseling and counseling graduate student at Cleveland State University.
Yeah, and out of the picture, Gina has been gone. She's going to be gone for the summer. Eric is probably out at some dance recital. I mean, Eric's not doing the dance recital, but his daughter's probably doing the dance recital. But you never know with Eric. Yeah, we'd all pay to see Eric in a dance recital. Musical. Eric loves musicals. And Stephanie's got has got a conflict, and Britt is out for the week too. So it's a shortened group. So we're going to do this twice go round, and we have some good questions. And let's go ahead and start out with Elliott.
Okay. What is your best improvisation when trying to get some form of wildlife out of your abode?
So I sort of wish that this was one of the video episodes that we did, because I've needed to get wildlife out of the abode, so to speak, a few times in my life that are like super memorable. And so one time when I was living in Florida, there was a rat. And if you've been to Florida, you understand that Florida rats are different from, for instance, Ohio rats or northern rats, I suppose.
Yeah, the rats are unionized up here in Ohio.
Yeah, the sort of the solo rats, the ones that do independent contracting down in Florida, they make bank, and they are quite large. And I have never, and I don't understand how anything gets in the house that's this big. But I remember the idea of feeling like I wanted to hop up on a chair and scream when I saw the size of this rat, right? And I didn't live in a place that was like a bad part of town or anything like that where like rats existed. It's just like just animals in Florida. It's a different life for people who have like lived right like in those kind of environments. But I freaked, right, and so needed to like get an exterminator to come in. I was sort of like, and I do this with any time like something gets in the house that I don't want in a house. I'm not necessarily someone, at least not anymore, who's going to necessarily like try to like squish it or kill it, right? I'd like to get it back outdoors if I can. Especially with like, I've been doing that a lot more with like, anytime that I see like a bug, I'm just like trying to get it back outdoors, do your thing. But the rat was a little bit different because it's like, it's hiding inside of a room in my house. I had corralled it. It's always about corralling and getting it to a specific location. And I'm sort of like putting things in specific spots to try to get it like outdoors too. So what I tried to do before I called the exterminator, I tried to like leave it like pieces of it. I can't believe that I actually did this, and I can't believe I'm admitting it, but I remember leaving like little pieces of cheese up to the front door from the room that it was in. Like it would actually like go and do that and not be just like emotionally freaked inside of the room and just like, being in there. And so eventually just had to call an exterminator and get it taken care of. But so the sort of cartoony Bugs Bunny-ish, little candies, little piece of candy every 2 steps did not exactly work for the Florida rat. So yeah, that's I guess as much improv I can do there.
I got tons of stories about wildlife in our household. And as you're speaking, Mitch, more of them come to mind. So I could do just a whole show on exterminating wildlife from our household. Yeah. I grew up as a biology student and worked in a rat lab. So anything that involves any kind of species other than human, I'm responsible for taking care of in the household. Let's start with, well, I'll tell two stories. One story was we were living in Georgia in a single floor house. Um, and unbeknownst to us, we didn't have a cap on our chimney. So we had a glass walled fireplace, with the glass doors. And one day I woke up, went into the living room, and there was a squirrel in our fireplace. So the rooms didn't have closed doors. The rooms had, and we had an entranceway that was pergo. And so with that in mind, we called the exterminator and they wanted like $500. And $500 is about half of our monthly budget at that, or a fourth of our monthly budget at that point. And so I had to improvise. And we had a couple of couches. So what I did was basically make a tunnel of couches to go from the fireplace to the front door. And I had a broom with me, and we opened up the front door and we opened up the glass door and propped it open. And we put curtains over the open doorways that led into the kitchen and led back into the bedrooms. And then it was my turn to execute. The wife and kids went into a back bedroom, and I opened the doors, stuck the little broom in there, knocked it around, and eventually the squirrel jumped out. And I don't know if it was fate or if my planning worked so well, but it got all the way down the tunnel of couches until it got to the pergo in the front room, or in the entranceway, and it couldn't get any traction on the pergo. So I ran up to it with the broom and did just like a hockey stick move and swatted that thing out the front door. I, to this day, insist that my wife owes me $500 for that trick. More currently, and this will be a little shorter, flies. Aileen likes to leave the doors open because, it lets the fresh air in during the day. It also lets in the house flies. And then she goes to bed at 8:30, goes into a dark room, closes the door. I'm up working with the only light on in the house, which are these computer monitors. The flies are attracted to computer monitors, so they're attracted to me. And I just don't like house flies. So I went out and bought one of those industrial strength bug zappers, and they're supposed to be used for outside, but I didn't know. And I brought it inside and hooked it up. And the thing sounds like a gunshot when a fly goes off in it. It's really quite redeeming. So, I know it's not very Buddhist of me, but there's joy that I'm not chasing that fly around the house or trying to coax it into other rooms and out the door.
Those are great. Did you know, Marty, there's like it's a racket you can buy it's an electrically charged racket, and you can hit flies with it, it puts a bit more sport into it. So, ever want
Yeah,
to.
I got one of those, and the best I can do is press it against our front window, our bay window, and then it sits in there and never jumps back to hit the thing to fry up the little fly. So,
well, these good answers. Like Marty, I've got two stories as well, because one led to the other. A friend of mine from Ireland, but he lives here now. Jim, well, we call him Jimmy, but he likes Jimbo, but he doesn't look like a Jimbo. But he's kind of a handy, we say the politically incorrect phrase, handyman. He just works on stuff. He's very good with stuff. And we turned out we had this apartment we were renting over here on Park Avenue in Kent had a yellow jacket nest in the basement. And we started noticing yellow jackets in the first floor apartment, went down, discovered this huge honking nest, And of course, Jimmy's like, oh, we can do that. We just got the raid. And I was like, okay, what do we do? He says, we'll just go down and we'll spray it. And I said, well, I don't know, man. I'm not into bugs. I'm not into bees. He's like, well, don't worry. And then he's like, doesn't matter what time of day. They don't sleep. I'm like, are you sure? Then we had this big debate about whether yellow jackets sleep or not. Okay. And finally, I think the Irish got kind of riled up in him, and he grabs a broom, back to the brooms, and he whacks the nest. He goes, see, there you go. And next thing you know, we are swarmed with yellow jackets, screaming, running up the stairs. So I decided first thing, if that ever happens again, don't have Jimmy there, and then B, have proper equipment. So then fast forward 2 years, we're in the same apartment and there's a bat in the apartment. And my dear friend Dennis Swinford is there. And Dennis and I are like, oh, okay, we're going to get this bat out. And I remembered about proper equipment. And our version of that was 2 laundry baskets, the round ones. We had those on our head. And we each had a broom. And we were running through the apartment with the laundry baskets on our heads, swinging the broom at the bat, not doing very good. And then my partner, Jen, opened the front door and the thing just flew out the front door. So I was like, okay, crisis averted. But never really good to have to get wildlife out of the house.
My third story was a bat story in my future mother-in-law's house. And I got called over to remove it. And, they wanted it to be removed, but they didn't want me killing it in the house. So I took the Afghan off her couch, which really worked like a good net to catch it. And I got the bat out the house by catching it in the Afghan and dragging it out to the parkway by the street. And I shook it out. And then I went inside to see and looked back to see if the bat would fly off or whatever. Cat came right over, grabbed it, ran off with it. So end of bat.
And just why I learned yellow jackets really don't sleep. They kind of go slow because when it gets dark, they don't go out the nest very much, but they don't sleep unless it's winter. This was summer. So I'm
glad you answered that, because I was thinking of switching my question to do yellow jackets sleep and seeing where we could go from there. I also have a bat story myself. I'm sort of being reminded of what you said, Marty, about like when sort of being reminded about these other experiences. When I was a resident assistant at Baldwin Wallace, we had a bat get from the attic down into the second floor of the building, which would have meant that I don't even understand the concept of how this bat got to this point in the building, but it did. It got trapped in a resident's room. And if you can imagine being a resident and having a bat in your room, this was crazy. But the thing that I'll remember from this experience more than anything else was that, A, I didn't get paid enough to catch this bat. But one of the other resident assistants did catch the bat by putting a trash can over it against the wall. I will never forget that screeching sound that it made on the edges of the trash can. Like, this bat was probably like traumatized, and, there's that part of it too, and so we did the thing where you sort of like drop the piece of paper in front of the top of the container, and then we were able to get the bat out. The bat started flying around and moved off. Didn't get caught by a cat, but that's, I guess, my bat story. Yeah, like that question. So instead of asking if yellow jackets will sleep, I'll ask if you could be the best at any profession other than the one that you have, what would it be?
I had a hard time with this because I like the profession I'm in. I don't consider myself the best, far from the best. In my profession. And I think some of the stuff that the best people do are just not me anyways. So why would I want to be the best anyways? But I thought 25 years ago, I probably would have said radio, terrestrial radio. I would have loved to have had a bigger and longer career and better career in terrestrial radio. And I didn't see much difference between what we were doing in small markets and what they were doing in larger markets. So 25 years ago, that would be that. Right now, I think it would be movie director or film editor. I think I would enjoy that a great deal, to direct movies and, even if not direct, edit movies. So those are my answers.
Those are good ones. I think for me, it would definitely be cooking. Some sort of cooking. I love nurturing people, and I love being creative in the kitchen. And I'm kind of masochistic, and I like musicians' hours. I like extremity. So I would probably do that, and I would love it. I would want to start with younger knees, but I love cooking. I love baking, and just any opportunity to learn to do that better. And you're nurturing people, you're feeding people, and you're making things people enjoy consuming. Hopefully.
Damn, I wish I would have thought of that answer. That's a perfect answer for me.
It's a great answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of meshes with counseling. It's nurturing people, but just different expression.
Yeah, thank you both for your answers there. I think, in a similar vein to radio, one of the things that I wanted to do when I was much younger was announcing for baseball. I wanted to be a baseball announcer, and I think I may have referenced some of this on the show before, but maybe not. My mom always talks about when, she'd say, Mitch, when you were a kid, right? you would just go up and you turn the TV on and you turn the volume down on the baseball games and you do the announcing yourself, right? You turn down the guys who were talking on the TV and you'd want to do the announcing yourself, and we'd have to let you do it, because you were pretty forceful. You were pretty forceful. You wanted to talk and you wanted to do announcing. And I loved announcing because of, I mean, obviously we have Tom Hamilton here for the Guardians, all-timer, one of the best to ever do it, right up there with Vin Scully. And I think that like listening to Tom Hamilton back when, right, like back when we were sort of like doing that, I think like most people were doing that in their cars, like sort of like all the time, was like one of the things you were turning on was you were just turning on baseball games, right? You were turning on and listening to baseball games in the summer. I remember going every single time that I go to baseball practice, it's like, when are one of those games on? And so, there's definitely announcers who are who sort of, I guess, like rise above the rest a little bit. I think there's also a ton of great announcers around. I really don't prefer, like, for instance, like if anybody's familiar with like Michael Kay, I think with New York Yankees, it's just not, I just don't get like anything, like when he says "see ya," I don't get anything from that. It doesn't do anything for me. And in fact, like, I don't like when home runs are like hit during Yankees games, because I guess that's actually the one time that I'm still turning the volume down if I ever have to listen to Michael Kay. Not because he's not a fine announcer. I just, just not for me, not a preference.
That's a great answer, because your voice has the tone, the tenor, the range. I mean, it'd be very good for that. And I remember listening to the Tom Hamilton, and it took me a while, but I figured out the way he would deal with consonants that could bump up against each other, like two T's. And instead of brought to you by, he'd say Brock to you by, like Brock. And as soon as I put it together, then it was almost like the music of how he spoke really got into my brain. He's definitely one of the all-time best, I think.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I can't say Harry Carey in Chicago was the all-time best, but he was definitely noticeable.
Yeah,
questionable whether he was sober when he was doing the game, but he was definitely noticeable. But in Chicago, when the home run is hit, the whole crowd gets up and starts going, "Whoop, there it is! Whoop, there it is!" And it's a you go to a Cubs game, it is a crowd experience. That's kind of fun. It's like going to a European soccer game. So my question is, how do you manage your scholarly writing? Are you disciplined or disruptive?
I struggle with this one, not because I can't describe my process to you, but it's neither. My family would say it's disruptive. I would say it's disciplined, but when a topic speaks to me, it gets in my brain. And then, I anthropomorphize my brain as Jimmy. And then Jimmy starts just sending out messages and then starts making connections. And it starts going faster and faster around my brain. And if I don't get it down, I'll lose something important. So I just blast it down. It's usually about 40 pages. And then I'm like, okay, I got to cut like 25 of these pages, which is not a problem when you start that way. I guess I would say it's intuitive and disruptive. Like lately, though, I've got some papers just like on long COVID. It's very hard to find a home for them. And, I can resonate with that. That's how my life was, too. But I'm like, okay, so I keep trying. But I'd say that's the part that's the most disciplined. Never give up on a piece that you believe in, that I believe in. But I'll give it at least 4 tries. If it's rejected by 4 journals, then I'll lay it aside for a while. That's the disciplined part. But the part where it came to me and I have to get it on paper is a just freaking nightmare. But it's effective for me.
Yeah, so I love this question, and was trying to figure out, because there's a lot of sort of meaning to me for like the idea of like disciplined or disruptive. I was sort of like thinking of disruptive as like, right, like I think the reason that I do get attached to writing, and as a student I don't have I'm sort of looking forward to when I'm doing more teaching in my life, and I'm able to like focus more on the writing, and I've sort of got like more clinical experience to inform the writing, right? Like I think there's a lot of those components. But in terms of like I took disruptive in this case to sort of mean like, I think the reason that I do get interested in writing is I view that there is a problem. And so one of the pieces of research that I would like to do may even be something that could be even something like a dissertation, because I view this as a significant problem inside of our industry, is the idea of clients reporting suicidality. The reason that I think this is problematic is because the sort of mandated reporting outside of confidentiality, right? Like the idea of mandated reporting almost takes, we don't want to take suicidality, like reports of suicidality. We don't want to not take them seriously, but importantly, we don't want to take them too seriously because then no one's ever going to tell you, right? And so if a client thinks I'm going to get pink slipped, then they're not going to tell their counselor. If a client doesn't want their parent to be told, then they're not going to tell a counselor. And you can't get treatment for what you don't talk about in counseling. I do firmly believe that. And so I think that, and I've had conversations with colleagues about how not necessarily, right, like the idea of honesty here for a client isn't exactly what I'm talking about, but the idea of like when there are repercussions to talking about something, I think it makes sense for the client to not want to talk about it. This isn't even something that is just limited to suicidality. For instance, if a client wants to talk about, right, like spirituality or religion, but the counselor has made it obvious that that's not acceptable to talk about inside the room, then the client's never going to receive sort of, right, like quote unquote, like treatment for that concern. Right. The idea of like something like a client coming in and talking about like sex or like sexual health. You can sort of like go on and on and on. And like when a client knows that it's sort of like not okay or sort of like unacceptable, or that there's repercussions, whether sort of like, right, like the idea of personal, like, oh, I'm going to be judged by my counselor, or sort of, right, like the more legal repercussion of like, you might have to be put in a hospital, even though that might make it worse for you. And I think clients know that overwhelmingly. And so like, I think that in that way, like the things that I'm interested in are sort of intended to be disruptive because I view like, okay, we have a major problem here. And so like, I'm not saying that we shouldn't necessarily report on confidentiality, but the idea that it's not up to the client has always baffled me. So perhaps more disruptive.
I'm in the middle of trying to finish something. Let me correct that. I'm in the middle of trying to start something so I can finish it. Writing for me has always been disruptive. That's probably, if you go back to that other question, why I would never see myself in the top of my profession, because those folks do a lot of writing and they're recognized for that. And I hate writing, but I have to do it. When I'm doing it and when I'm creating, that's a different thing, but it takes me a long time to get there. So I create a outline, and then let it sit for a long time. And then it's a series of 100-yard dashes to the finish line, and those 100-yard dashes are bursts of, I've got to get this section done. Now I've got to get this section done. And I'll get up from the chair and go do something else for a while. Or after I've done 3 or 4 of them, I'll say, okay, that's it for today. But it is disruptive. My wife has pointed out to me that I'm an at when I am writing or have to write, because I'm not very kind. I'm not focused. I really don't give a damn about what's going on with the dog. I am driven to get this piece of work done, that through the whole thing until I finish it, I'm like, why did I agree to do this? And then I finish it and it's like, hey, there's some pretty good ideas in here. Well, I should have done this a long time ago. So yeah, disruptive.
Just to tag on to that, Marty, was funny. My wife was pregnant with our first child, that her water broke. I was working to finish revisions on a paper for the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology, which I was so excited to publish in. And I literally finished it. I got all the stuff sorted. I hit send and her water broke. And then we went to the hospital. And it was like, that was one of the few times there was just kind of a hand in glove, nice rhythm to it that worked out for everyone. But yeah, it's not always like that.
Yeah.
Well, it's back to me, I suspect. I've had the wonder and privilege of I'm teaching 2 sections of practicum this summer, which is delightful because I don't get as many clinical classes during the year. And I have had comments/questions on this topic. Out of 19 students, I've had 8, which that's fairly significant. And what they say they would like help on, and I've paraphrased a quote. This is from the whole group, but the gist of it is, I'd like to appear more confident when I'm in a session. And I'm like, developmentally, yep, that's right on trajectory. I get it. But then I ask them, do you want to appear more confident, or do you want to feel more confident and have that expressed through your visage, your physical presence? And the dialogue is basically, yeah, I would like that, Dr. I, but I don't think it's going to be a while before I get that. So for now, I'd like to appear more confident. And I love the candor. I love the dialogue. But so I'm throwing out to you, how do you work with students on, confidence, or, your peers with confidence, and what does it mean to you? Of course, in a counseling setting, that could be a big topic, but.
So as a student in this prac class, who I don't think yeah, okay. So yeah, I didn't broach this with you because it's something that I'm sort of, I guess, I think there may have been a time where I was concerned about it. I do wonder, and I certainly don't judge anyone who's sort of like going through this, because I imagine there would have been a time, or if things had maybe worked out a little bit differently, where I had sort of like gone through this. There is, I think, a discrepancy between really like where is I'm wondering like where the focus is. And because confidence, I don't think is like something that, like, appearing more confident is just like, hey, I think like a lot of that just like is going to come with time, right? And we sort of like, and that's okay to just like come with time. I think that, I know that I've had these experiences when I've been focused more on, right. And this was something, Marty, you said, I think like right before I got into prac, that I just like, it just keyed in my head, and it just like has just stayed in my head, right? The idea of like being in the room with somebody and just like, as opposed to like doing things, right? Just the idea of like being, right? And that, I think, has helped me a lot with the idea of like, I'm okay as I am, right? And that I don't need to sort of meet like an expectation that I can't fulfill right now, right? Like, and that's, I think, something that I've had to realize is that like, I'm not a perfect clinician, right? And it's not about being a perfect clinician, because I'm never going to be a perfect clinician, right? It's about growth. And I think that the more that I'm able to sort of like be in the room and focus more on, right, like more of my attention towards my client, that has made it less internal for me. Right. And so I'm sort of trying to jump out of the internal, like, kind of like the Mitch up here who's like thinking about stuff all the time, right? Like really trying to jump out of that. And I feel like doing that inside of a session where, especially when like, it's really helpful when you've got a client who's motivated and is sort of like having, like, there's a lot of like dialogue going on, but it just sort of like takes you out of sort of like, out of your own head, right? And sort of like it becomes less about like appearing confident or like being confident, as opposed to just like being yourself, and I think like that for me has like really, really worked out, right? Like and so I'm just sort of trying to focus on like, how do I just be myself in the room, whatever that looks like, but whatever sort of like feels right. And also, right, like the idea of like focusing on being more client focused, right? I think, there's definitely a lot of talk about like intervention focused. And I'm like, we're all sitting here in practice. Like we've done like less than 20 hours at this, like the idea that we're just like chucking around, like the idea, and people aren't doing this, but the idea that we can just like jump in with interventions, right? Like this is, I don't think necessarily what we're meant to do necessarily at the beginning, but that's just my 2 cents.
This interesting problem. One way of looking at it when I first heard the question was thinking about it in terms of, oh, so you're not feeling confident. Well, that's probably good because your client's probably not feeling confident either. So what can you use from that lack of confidence that you have in yourself that will help the client be informed about what their confidence is? Another reaction I have to the question is, okay, well, then you should be the first to raise your hand when I ask, can we have a volunteer to do a simulation in class? Because the only way you're going to get confident is to do more of this. And in here, it's a little safer. You can make mistakes. We can learn from them. No one's expecting you to be perfect, and your client probably isn't expecting you to be perfect either. But in here, at least you can make those mistakes. So I am surprised at the number of students who are unwilling or try to hide from the opportunity to practice in class or even in front of the whole class, which I think is also very informative. And the way to build confidence is to just take those risks in front of people. So when you're sitting with a client by yourself, you'll feel more confident about how you can handle that conversation or be part of that conversation. So it's an interesting problem because it's sort of chicken and egg. Without confidence, how do you build confidence in order to have more confidence?
These are wonderful answers. I appreciate them. And I like that, what you said, Marty, too, about do some simulations, step up in class. It's going to be a lot easier to learn from failure in that kind of supportive environment. I love that. That's lovely. I think what I try to convey to students is when I teach theory, we're doing non-directive client-centered, whatever you want to call it. We're going to look at Carl Rogers, then I'm going to do a demonstration of my idea of client-centered. Then I want them to go out and practice their version of playing whatever. You can just be trying to be whoever, being client-centered. You can be imitating Dr. I, trying to be client-centered, or Carl Rogers. It's all good. Imitation's all good. So part of it's just repetition. But I really say you've got to be yourself. We focus on self as instrument a good bit in our program at Cleveland State, because we believe that the humanness, the individuality of each of us is one of our greatest tools, as long as we understand what the boundaries are in the professional role of counselor. Now, my other response is, I said, well, basically, I think I'm good at like a couple of things. One of them is screening students for the program. And if I didn't think you were ready, you would not be in this class. And when I say that, they believe me. But it's like, I just like, it's almost like a little cognitive dissonance. It's like, well, you're here. So not just me, but a lot of other faculty believed that you were ready. So be yourself. And sometimes that's just being scared and figuring out a way to not appear scared. Like they say, courage is not absence of fear. It's just being able to act, with the presence of fear.
Yeah, I think also, and I think we talked a little bit in class, right? Like, it's okay to feel anxious, and I sort of wish this was something that we could also like say more. It's like, it's okay to like feel anxious inside of a session, right? Like to me, it's like you feel anxious because you want to make sure that you do a good job for the client, right? And so like, even if someone's like not necessarily feeling confident, like to me, that sort of, I think, can come from like a good place too, right? The idea of like, I want to feel confident because I want to feel like I do a good job for my client. And so like, but also I think like anxiety means that someone's like moving towards that point. So I think like there can be benefits to anxiety too.
And just to tag on to that, Mitch, I love that point. And Marty, you might be able to help me situate this in Buddhism. But the human nature, we have kind of a monkey mind, and we're like, we don't know what the heck that monkey mind is going to do, right? And we practice yoga, meditation, contemplative prayer, and we find ways to work with the monkey mind. Not necessarily tame it, but to work with it. And so, yeah, you kind of want to know developmentally where someone is in relation to their own mind.
Mitch, you got a new one for us?
Yeah, let's go with what counseling theories or interventions do you think will become less popular over time?
Oh man, this is the difficult of being next in the lineup. That's a big question. Low hanging fruit, psychodynamic, unfortunately, because little do we know, most of what we're doing is psychodynamic in terms of drive related stuff. I would hope the dehumanized version of cognitive behavioral therapy would be one that would disappear or dissipate. I have similar feelings about EMDR. So, most modern practitioners and I have a difference of opinion in terms of both of those approaches, but I take to heart what Elliott talked about in terms of bringing your person into the process, and can't do it with either one of those in a sense. And so you can do it with psychodynamic to a degree, but yeah, those are my short and probably answers that will get me in trouble.
No, they're good answers because it's a brilliant question. And I my first thought was everything, Mitch. Everything. And because professors have to get tenure, so they have to reinvent theories now and again. I think there were all kinds of versions of cognitive behavior therapy, and it's fine. It's what we do. If you were to tell a musician, Well, I'm sorry, you can't do 12 bar blues progressions anymore. Those are now copyrighted. I mean, come on. That's half of country music and a good part of blues. I mean, so yeah, everyone, we're always going to improvise. And that's what I love about human beings, because it was like, as even professional mental health therapists, you know, we codify our ethics and everything, and then new things pop up like coaching, you know, and coaching's not regulated yet, and it ought to be. But human beings, we are quite brilliant at just trying stuff out, and we have no clue what's going to work. That's what I love about us. It's like, yeah, I mean, is that, you know, it's like, I got an idea. Well, let's try it. Is it going to work? I don't know. Oh, let's try it anyway. You know, it's just like, I love that. There's something about the human spirit in there that I think is teleologically healthy.
You know what I'm seeing a lot of, because I see these requests for the listserv that I run, come and learn this new, innovative, effective plan and treatment for so-and-so, or I'm doing my dissertation on this new, you want to be part of my dissertation because it's this new innovative method that is proven to be effective, blah, 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 blah. And I have written a few of them back, and I'm like, the claims you're making are not substantiated. You know, you might be excited about this little idea that popped into your head, but if you're going to say things like this, you're going to have some research base, particularly if you're going to ask for participants. You can't just tell them they must have missed the boat on something that you're excited about, but there's no research other than anecdotal experiences that you had, and now you want to do your dissertation on it. So it's not just the traditional theories, it's these fly-by night ideas that come up that people are trying to proliferate as the next best treatment for blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point, Marty. I definitely feel like I've been seeing a little bit more of that as well, right? Like sort of even the idea of like someone saying like, right, like EMDR is like the best treatment for, you know, for a trauma diagnosis, right? Or, you know, I mean, the idea, I think, right, like what you're saying sort of reminds me about like the idea of like, if we're choosing a treatment to treat a diagnosis, I think we're sort of missing the boat, right? Like, because like the individual should be the primary like reason that we choose a treatment, not about like, you know, sort of like specific types of you know, things about like, oh, this will cure your PTSD, or this will cure your, you know, depression, right, by using this intervention. It's like, well, A, no, like I don't think there is a cure for this kind of stuff, and B, right, like I think like not acknowledging like the benefits. Like people are very quick to acknowledge the benefits, but very slow to acknowledge the limitations, right? And so like, yeah, and I think this is sort of like one of my answers to this question is, you know, Marty, you said about the idea of sort of like the dehumanizing version of CBT. I really, maybe it's less of a, I think it's going to, but more of a, I hope it falls to the wayside, especially sort of like the language that's, you know, fairly dated, right? The idea of like, you know, I think there's just better language choices, right? Like even if it's something as simple as like preferred or unpreferred thought, as opposed to something like, you know, maladaptive or adaptive thought, because even using the positive version of it and just sticking to like sort of like the positive psychology, you have the other side of the coin, right? And so if someone can think like, oh, if I'm not having the adaptive thought, then I'm having the maladaptive thought, or if I'm not having the rational thought, then I'm having the irrational thought. And I think some practitioners in counseling, and I've seen this both firsthand in my own practice and also right, like with conceptualizations of other clinicians, they'll even take it farther in terms of like, well, your emotions are maladaptive, or you, the person, are being maladaptive. And I think that can be very harmful for clients. And so I sort of think that there's a more affirming way to do CBT that works, but there's also some additional limitations for like, you know, CBT for like trauma diagnoses. One of the things I don't think that we talk about is dropout rates in terms of like research studies. You know, you can say that you have like a -20 on the BDI, right? Like a 2 standard deviation below the mean on the BDI for reduction. But if your dropout rate is 40 or 50%, right? And the average for like cognitive exposure, or, you know, many of these exposure processing theories is oftentimes like 30 to 40%. If half of your research sample size is dropping out and you don't give any reason why, which many of them don't do because they're not measuring not required to measure like adverse experiences during like cognitive exposure for something like trauma, then all of a sudden you've got a modality that, a little less than half of your client base is just walking out the door on, and so I'm surprised. EMDR is less, but even like EMDR's dropout rate typically hovers in between like 15 and 25% in the research. That's a lot of people. That's an awful lot of people to go in and just be like, hey, by the way, like you've got about a 25% chance here to drop out. And that could mean that your symptoms get worse. We don't know. We don't measure it in the research. Who knows, right? And so I think talking a little bit more about the limitations of, these interventions would benefit us as a profession and benefit our clients so that they know what to expect,
Well, I'm going to dumb it down a bit for my last question. What old television show do you now remember and wish that they were still on?
That's easy. The Dick Van Dyke Show. Oh, Mary Tyler Moore. Carl Reiner, Maury Amsterdam, Rose Marie. Yeah, the Dick Van Dyke Show. I watch all the DVDs all the time. It was like, and even he said, a 6 or 7 year run for a show like this is quite good, and we should stop at that point. And there was a sense of the existential reality of finitude in the meta-analysis of how they handled the show. But then they did a lot of meta humor with the Alan Brady character. And I just thought it was one of the smartest shows on television, and I still do. And still makes me laugh. Sometimes a walnut is just a walnut.
This is a really challenging one for me, because a lot of the old, I grew up with the sort of the cartoon shows, right? And I was a big cartoon watcher back in the day. And then as soon as I went into high school, sort of like stopped watching TV because the internet was a thing, right? And so it became like something to switch to. You could switch to video games, you could switch to, sort of eventually it became like the live streaming stuff. But I will say that I do miss the cartoons. I understand that very, very clearly there is some let's say unaffirming, to put it lightly, stuff in like the Warner Brothers stuff. As someone who like watched Bugs Bunny growing up and not really understanding at the time like what right, like what sort of like what they were portraying even as sort of like a kid, right, who's like younger than 10 watching that stuff. But it's still like, it still affects people regardless if you're like not aware, right, like of how, stuff like, racist or sexist things can kind of bleed through. And there are many, right, like there are still many episodes that don't have those things. I think that, if we're going to be completely judgmental over what was produced in the past, then we will never find the end of what we can be judgmental about, right? And so, like, I think that we need to acknowledge, right, like that, like stuff in those shows, right, like for many different shows, right, like comes from a different time. But I think like sometimes I do, right, like, miss sort of the just like the innocence of like those shows. And especially for me, what it was about was the music, sort of the classical music inside of like the Warner Brothers shows, to talk about like why I actually like them, right? The implementation of music in older television, especially because of I think just the way that things used to, it used to be like you could tell a story through music. I think we sort of like do that less. And so that's one of the things that I've always appreciated about, some of the older cartoons, is that we're many more opportunities to tell a story through music or with music. It feels like much of the music, like with the Avengers movies or something like that, is like overproduced. It just feels like I'm being forced to feel an emotion as opposed to, something else that feels very forced. But I've always liked, right, the, like older shows like that, which implemented like, or integrated more music within the show itself.
Yeah. Cartoons, I think Simpsons, of course, but Animaniacs and the stuff that happened, so I went on and I bought all the old Animaniacs, so I have those. But this question comes from, I follow a thread on Reddit called Forgotten TV, and people will post things that, old shows that were on, and it's sort of like, yeah, I kind of remember that. Well, somebody posted Insomnia. I don't know if I have this right. David Tell. No, not the film. This was a show. Oh, Insomniac. Oh, and it's David Tell. He's he is a comedian, and the show started off the same way as every show started off the same way. He's finishing a short bit. They show a short bit of his live stand-up in whatever city he's in, and supposedly he can't fall asleep. So he spends the night roaming the streets and running into interesting people in interesting places. And so I was like, oh yeah, I remember that show. I love that show. And I wonder if I can get it somehow. And in the thread, somebody had collected all of the shows and put them on their Google Drive. And so here they are. And so I downloaded all 5 seasons of them, and I'm working. They're 20-minute shows because they were half-hour shows on Comedy Central, minus the commercials. So it's kind of fun. I mean, I watched Chicago, and I just watched Cleveland this last hour, and then New Orleans and he runs into a bunch of very weird people. He ended off the Cleveland show by opening the West Side Market, which is a Cleveland very, noticeable market to go to and things like that. So it's kind of fun because it combines that tour guide stuff, but in the middle of the night where all the weirdos are out. So Insomniac would have been a show I would have liked to have continued. And a lot of the elements of it you see now in food shows and travel shows and things like that. So it was a fun little show. So those are our questions for tonight. We got one final question for a final shot question. Could you land a plane?
I'm assuming the context is I'm in a plane and someone needs to land it. Quote Harrison Ford from Temple of Doom. How hard could it be?
Landing a plane is like a weird fantasy of mine. I don't know where this comes from, but I want to I think it's like a hero fantasy or something in there where it's like, like the pilots have eaten, right, like raw tuna and they need somebody. And I'm like, yeah, I'm emotional. Like if it's, I think of,
I think we got a show title out of that one. Landing a plane is a weird fantasy of mine.
Yeah, I think it's like, gosh, it's like, I wish I could remember this quote. It's from a video game, but it's like, it would have to be me. Somebody else would have got it wrong, and I could just imagine like sitting there and having someone else land the plane. Right. Like, no, like if someone's like, hey, if they're asking for volunteers and somebody doesn't go in like the first 3 seconds, I'm like, I'll take the responsibility of either landing or not landing said plane.
Just to fulfill your fantasy.
And maybe save some lives. I think that would probably be the number one thing is to save some lives. But fantasy number 2.
Yeah,
I think Mitch and I can definitely fly together now.
My answer is I'm not sure. I mean, this was a dream that I had recently that I was caught in the cockpit trying to land a plane. And I think I do well with dials and all that sort of stuff. Someone would have to talk me through it, obviously, because I don't know what things happen in a plane. But yeah, if somebody talked me through it from the ground, I think the passengers would have a better than 50-50 chance of me being able to land the plane. So if not, maybe we'll never know. Hopefully we're never in the position to be asked to do that.
I was just going to say, I heard an explosion in a parallel dimension, but we don't have to go there.
Yeah, I don't want to land no plane if I don't have to.
Well, thanks to the firing squad tonight, we've got Elliott and Mitch and myself. Look for some of these characters on their podcasts on the podtalk.net. You can find out more about them at circularfiringsquad.net. Make sure to check out Tech Savvy Professor podcast, hosted by myself and Eric, who's not with us tonight, and also Vision Profiles, a podcast about the Apple Vision Pro. Our theme music is from Menage a Quad, Real Swing Shet. That's it for this episode of Circular Firing Squad. Ready, fire, aim.